And welcome, welcome. Hey, welcome. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation and around the world. Welcome to the Tech Reckoning Fest 5. It is Thursday, November 14th as we're recording this. I will pause the share. Let's stop the share. How about that? Hey, this is John Troyer. I am here with my colleague, Amy White. Amy, howdy. Amy is in an undisclosed
Howdy.
location, but I'll disclose that it's a ship in the ocean because we live in the future. We really, it's pretty cool. We're going to be here for, I don't know, 90 minutes, 120 minutes. We're going to talk about Kubernetes. We've got a couple of really good guests on. I tried to make it not quite so frenetic this time, although, I've already pulled one panelist up or one attendee up, and I might do it again. Stop me, or I might do it again. Just because we're all pretty hands-on here, and it's really interesting to hear perspectives of what's going on. I will be the conceit. I will be at KubeCon next week. The conceit of this whole thing is that many of you may be either going to KubeCon or interested in KubeCon, people listening to this recording. So these are kind of, the Tech Reckoning Fest are kind of designed as both as a prep for that, if you're going to go, maybe save some time or maybe figure out some booths to go to, or if you're not going, it kind of catches you up and gives you a little bit of the vibe of what's going to be going on there. KubeCon is pretty big this year. I don't know, 20K people-ish, or I think. I might have that wrong. I'm going to be there working with Stu Miniman and theCUBE. We are going to be doing, so thecube.net, we're going to be doing interviews in 15-minute little bites, usually pretty good. Some of them get a little bit corporate, but we try to keep it interesting. Sometimes some surprising stuff. Always interesting to see how people are in real life, personalities, and it's all unscripted. So there you go. And it's going to be an interesting conference. It has become the preeminent cloud native. It's Cloud Native Con and KubeCon. It's really the only independent conference, and it's one of the few independent conferences left. B, it's one of the few independent cloud conferences, right? Because you're going to AWS reInvent. AWS still believes that if they never tell anybody about another cloud, they don't exist. I swear, you know this if you're in the industry, right? They don't. They scrubbed your slides of everything. You're not allowed to mention anybody else. And VMware is also. I mean, they talk about it. They partner with all the clouds, so that's kind of one. AWS, or Azure, Google, anyway, there's not this is a really good conference for exactly that reason. And there's a lot of really good, even aside from all the kind of open source activity and upstream and the Kubernetes contributors get together and the huge amount of ecosystem activity around Kubernetes. So Amy, you are all set. Thank you for joining us. Amy is managed the entire production, but also managing the chat. And if you have questions, just put them on the chat. Amy, anything else that folks need to know if they're live here with us?
No, I think that's it. I think you covered it.
All right. So the recording. Hey. So good. Well, good luck. If we do see Amy rocking, that means she's on a ship, again, or the satellite has gone out. So anyway, we'll be here, and I think we should probably just get going because we've got kind of a good schedule, and I'm anxious to talk to Rosemary. Any other details? Oh yeah, you'll be sent the recordings. We'll slice this up into recordings, but we'll also, and put them on YouTube, but we'll also send you an email. If you want to talk to me next week, would love to see you. Just let me know. And Kat and I are there, and be happy to talk to folks. Let's see. Anybody who is going to be there, kind of raise your hand. I'm kind of curious. I'd love to see you. Tonight, Kat and I will be at Tech Field Day. It's 10th anniversary. So I see some folks here who may or may not be there and certainly know what that is, with a bunch of influencers. And so it seems like half of Silicon Valley. So that will be very cool at the Computer History Museum. I'm very much looking forward to that. All right. Let's see. Let's get going. Did I tweet? I tweeted. I'm such a good tweeter. Okay. Let's get started. So I will put up the slide. We're practicing a new operational procedure here because this is, I'm my own producer. I'm my own worst producer. Let's share the slide. All right. Thanks all. Okay, and welcome to Tech Reckoning Fest 5. It's November 14th, here with our next guest to kick things off, Rosemary Wang from HashiCorp. Really pleased to have her with us, a developer advocate there. And we'll get started right now for a little conversation and then a little bit of a woo and a little bit of a slide. And a little bit of a slideshow. Well, not slideshow, actually. No slides. It's just going to be demo. Rosemary, go ahead and unmute yourself, or I can. And welcome. Let me take this one off. Rosemary,
how's my audio?
You sound okay. You know,
Okay
is good enough these days. Okay is good enough. It's magic that it even works. This is kind of Star Trek-like. The fact that we actually aren't really in synchronous, like it's a little bit async, but it still all works out of the box. And although, the audio and video is compressed to shit. But anyway, that's the world. That's the imperfect world we live in. Rosemary, hey, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about you, get to know you. Now, you will not be at KubeCon next week, but you were in Velocity over in Berlin. You have a tendency to show up.
Yes.
You work out of Jersey City in the New York area on the East Coast, and you are a developer advocate for HashiCorp, and we're going to talk a little bit about console and service meshes and some things like that. Actually, service meshes ended up coming up a lot in my pre-conversations with people. So a topic worth talking about.
Very cool.
I don't know, but let me ask you a little bit about, yourself and I just tweeted right before the show here that, you have an interesting background, and just because, I don't know, how do you see? So many folks on here are bloggers or invested in the community in various technical communities. And for years, we've had this conversation about technical marketing and technical evangelism and, even before the technical advocacy, developer advocacy. And there's kind of as many views of a developer advocate as almost as there are developer advocates, also career path, things like that. I don't know. What do you see the role of a developer advocate, at least as you do it?
Yeah, I've always sort of been a developer advocate in some way, shape, or form, even without the title. And I think that's what sort of drew me to the role in the first place. Part of it was that people would ask me, oh, how do I do this? And then I'd sort of sit there and be like, I don't know, actually, let's sit and figure it out. And sometimes it was a really weird integration. Sometimes it was a new technology. And over time, I realized I was building education resources, not just because of someone else consuming it, but because I would forget how I did it. And I would always go back to it. And it just turned out to be really useful for someone else. And so all of these patterns and resources that I was thinking about and working with others, I was sort of like, hey, that's actually important in an open source community in particular. So I love to empower our open source community within the HashiCorp ecosystem. There are 6 tools that are all open source, so it's a massive ecosystem to help out with. And usually the community is great about promoting their own resources, how they learned it, and some of the integrations and features they're building. And it's my job to sort of bring those to attention and connect some of the dots in this massive ecosystem as well.
Right. Do you report, we're going to get into org charts here, which is funny if people know me, but do you report up into marketing, or do you report up into product?
So we report up into marketing, but we're extremely cross-functional. It's most of the time we're hands to keyboard writing the code. So we know a lot about sort of the engineering approach. We have to learn that as well as part of being a HashiCorp developer advocate. Right. We have to know about the product aspects. So what's going to happen next. And we certainly have to also know about messaging and being sort of a public facing.
Right. And sometimes, so now, we're talking about the role. So, developer advocates, one of the problems with them, with technical marketing, evangelists, they're the same kind of, they're similar roles that they can be different. But sometimes you're forced to wear a lot of hats, like you just said, right? You're in a smaller company, and HashiCorp is now not smaller, but you're not Dell. In a smaller company especially, you're expected to write blog posts, write code, maybe overlay, maybe you're a little bit of a sales overlay, a pre-sales overlay, maybe you're a customer success post-sales overlay. So you have customer meetings. Hopefully you're not customer support, but sometimes you're coming up with demos for presentations, or demos on your own time, or demos. Sometimes you're coming up with collateral, like tech marketing, should be doing around releases, or a role usually called tech marketing. Collateral for the website, like slide decks and stuff, or white papers. And in the meantime, you're also, most places you're expected to travel. So, how is it for you? How do you balance, balancing all this?
I think that the travel is important, at least in my individual view, to interface with the community that doesn't always get FaceTime, right? It's really hard. In North America in particular, we always have the privilege of being able to fly out and see someone face to face and have that interaction. But there are a lot of communities out there who may not have access to some of the resources for a variety of reasons. And so flying to them and traveling there is very practical. It gives them the opportunity to express and bring concerns right to our attention within the open source product. So that's the great part about travel and selecting the travel. I balance that with what material is reasonable to go online as sort of a more permanent artifact that someone will find useful and go back and refer to it. So I think that the balance is always difficult. There's definitely a discussion about burnout in general in the tech industry and balancing that specifically in developer advocacy. So it's definitely an ongoing struggle, but I try to err on the side of blog posts and as much virtual material as possible.
Nice. Well, you do travel. So, I notice, I notice a plant in the background of your screen. You're based out of the New York area. How do you, I take it I know this. We prep this ahead of time. I can't even, I have such a terrible poker face, take all my money. So, so we talked about that you do like gardening, indoor gardening and plants. And I'm kind of curious how how do you, aren't the poor little critters, how do you not neglect them as you travel? I guess you back and forth.
Yeah, I have learned, just like software architecture, to understand the constraints and find plants that fit the lifestyle. So a number of my plants are not water intensive plants. I learned my lesson after the first few, and the only one that is probably the most finicky is the African violet. And for the most part, it was fine. More recently, it's taken a turn for the worse because I transplanted it to a larger pot. So sadly, that's probably the only one that's suffering.
Yeah, those are kind of finicky. I know. I associate African violets with, my elderly aunts, and I just remember as a child being told not to put water over the leaves, just be very gentle with them. It's in the same way I tell children not to smack my dog, to pet it very gently. Anyway, the dog is, sleeping here. Let's kind of move on. So you've been at HashiCorp for how long now?
Almost a year.
Awesome. And, anything, and so, I don't know, this is not a question I believe I asked you. Anything surprising, most surprising thing, least surprising thing, most fun thing, I guess I won't make you to say the least fun thing you've done this last year.
I was most surprised by the remote friendly culture, which it's shocking to me because I came from a place where I had to go into the office, and there was a value to FaceTime, and there was a value to doing software delivery face-to-face within a team physically co-located. And so it's just surprising to me how much you can get done when everybody is remote and has to normalize on a way of working with the remote kind of process in mind. So it's just surprising to me how much you can do asynchronously. And HashiCorp is always trying to reinvent ways of doing remote better, and that's actually fantastic.
That is pretty cool. Without throwing my own team under the bus, if only one, sometimes we would think about hiring one person remote. But if your whole team is not remote, the one person, and I've talked with other people who have done this, right? And if only one person is remote, it's really not fair, and the team isn't set up for that. So you almost have to be kind of set up for the remote people, because there's so many conversations that happen over the cube wall, or if you're not organized, you just say, hey, let's have a meeting right now, and don't tell anybody about it in a different time zone.
Yeah.
Well, so you're not going to be at KubeCon. HashiCorp will be there. If folks want to reach out, and we'll connect people who are live here, or if you have any questions. But if other folks, other names to look out for, do you know who else is going to be there?
Yes. So we're going to have a booth at, I believe, S27. I hope that is the right number. I don't know what that
people
means.
Just look for the signs.
Exactly. One of my awesome teammates whose content you'll see today, his name is Nick Jackson. He's on Twitter at Sheriff Jackson. Sorry, Nick.
Awesome.
But he will actually be doing a talk, and so you can watch out for that. I don't remember when it is, but it is on the schedule. And we also will have Melissa Green, who's responsible for the community team, and she'll also be at the booth. And we'll definitely have a number of the HashiCorp team there at the booth and milling about too. So definitely keep an eye out.
Nice. Very cool. Melissa, for folks that don't know, actually, folks may know her actually from her days at EMC and even with a stint in Speaking in Tech podcast. So I love Melissa. She's awesome. Well, let's get to the hands-on portion of our show here. I said to Rosemary, I don't want marketing slides in this thing, and she's like, "Well, I don't have any slides. I'm just going to code." So, Rosemary, I'm going to hand it over to you and show us some stuff.
Awesome.
I think people, I characterize the folks here as being, Kubernetes knowledgeable, but maybe not Kubernetes experts. So we don't need the 101. We tend to be infrastructure-y, IT-y, and not developer-y. But I don't want to miscarry. I don't want to insult anybody. But anyway, so take it away and show us what's cool right now.
Awesome.
With console and some things like that.
Awesome. So these are not marketing slides. This is just a diagram because I realized it was very confusing to explain. So how's that? Everybody you can see that?
Awesome.
It's a browser.
Yep.
So it's interesting because the first time I heard about Service Mesh was 2 years ago. And the first thing that someone told me was, we need a service mesh. And I said, what? What does that even mean? And so I had a really difficult time understanding what the story was behind why we needed one and what was the purpose. So after some time and after playing around in the space, and when console came out, there was a story that came out of a project that I did. And I was like, wait a second, if we had console service mesh, it would have probably made it easier. So this is a little bit of that story. I know I briefly said no slides, but it's easier to understand with the diagram.
Mm-hmm,
Sadly,
sure.
It's just hard to, put it all together.
As long as they're, just some boxes and arrows, or one or two is always fine. But
yeah. Exactly. So the important part about this was kind of to set the stage. It started because there was a giant monolithic application. And for those who are less familiar with the software architectures, right, the monolithic architecture is a little bit like a ball of mud at times, right? It's a lot of functionality sort of dumped together in one body of code. And what we ended up sort of deciding was that this was a lot of functionality to put in one place. So why don't we split it up? And to make it even better and to take advantage of cool technologies and cloud elasticity, why don't we put it in the cloud on Kubernetes? That's a lot harder to do than just say, I'm going to just put something on Kubernetes, right? It's an older application. The code hasn't been really looked at in a long time. It's really hard to change. So refactoring and replatforming isn't a trivial task. And you run a really high risk of doing something wrong as a result. So this is sort of a representation. If you look at the left side of this, let me just zoom into here. It's a bit of a representation of sort of how we split this monolith, right?
Okay, I'm still seeing. I've got a Velocity Workshop.
Oh, interesting. That's not the right
up
one.
on my screen.
All right, hold on. Let me just check the right desktop. There we are. That's the right desktop. Okay, there we are.
Okay, this is a slide.
Perfect. So it comes down to, there was a web front end that was very difficult. Like, you don't want to change something on users that quickly. So we kept the web front end piece, and that was on premises. So it was a data center, and it was hosted in a VM. And then there was a API behind that, and the API did some, let's say, transactional logic. I'm not going to go into too much of what it did, but all of this was on the data center. And in order for us to gain a little bit of confidence on whether or not if it even worked on Kubernetes, right? We refactored the API, and it seemed to be working fine on premise, but we didn't know if it would work in Kubernetes or not. There are a whole bunch of things you have to wire up, right? So we were like, all right, we have to move it to Kubernetes, but it's a little dangerous. We don't know if it works or not. We don't know how users will react. If there's some latency issues, we don't know if there's something that we've disconnected, and we just don't know what's going on. So to mitigate the risk, because it was a very risk-averse organization, we said, all right, why don't we use a blue-green approach, which meant blue on the premise and green in Kubernetes. So that's where you see this blue and green line here.
Gotcha. And to be super clear, the two gray boxes over on the back, that's a that was a legacy. That's a legacy app in VMs. We didn't rewrite
Precisely.
it. It's not cloud native friendly. Gotcha.
No, not at all. So we had to take a portion of it and see if we could at least make it doable on Kubernetes. And the API piece was more doable than the web piece. So we managed to get the API in a container. It works locally. That was what everybody was saying, like it works locally, but we have no clue if it works with web. And at the time, we just had to wire it up in these weird ways. It was just complicated, right? We had load balancers everywhere. We had, DNS entries that were waiting between on-premise and cloud, and then the cloud endpoints were messed up. Security was upset because they had no way of understanding where the requests were going. There wasn't visibility across on-premises and cloud. So, and when I thought about it more and I learned about some of the features within the console kind of ecosystem that we have at HashiCorp, I was like, hey, some of the things in console could help with this. So an brief introduction into console. Console's for service networking, right? It does a lot of things. And a couple of things that it does do is service discovery. So it keeps a catalog. So as you can see here, it keeps a lovely catalog of the services that you have in your environment. You can also use it for a service mesh, and it's less about the service mesh and more importantly about the features that you get from using it, right? So you can use intentions to deny traffic, for example. So if I wanted to, I could say, hey, from an intent-based network policy standpoint, I can prevent API or web from talking to API. I can deny the traffic. And that's done on layer 4. And there's also a lovely key value store as well. This is kind of just, where it came from. So you can store configuration in here too.
Rosemary, let's back up one sec. I mean, we're going to end up talking about service mesh a couple times today.
Yeah.
And I think everybody here kind of, you get it by the name, but I mean, this is, let's see, this is control plane, not data plane, right? So it's not a router. But it is kind of and it's not a firewall, but it is something that is orchestrating endpoint, at least connecting endpoints. And in this case, okay, you said it's denying traffic on layer 4, but if API can't talk to itself, the API container can't talk to itself. It's also enforcing that, I guess, because are the network connectivity it would be running through console?
Yep. Yeah, so it would all be running through console. And it's actually a combination of control plane.
I was going to say, yeah, then it would need to, I contradicted myself.
Yeah, it's a combination of control plane and the data plane. And this is just by the architecture of the tool console itself, right? So console has a cluster, and that's actually the data plane. And what you see as sort of like the gray Envoy boxes are technically embedded into console clients. So the clients themselves are just for routing the data, kind of forwarding things, taking the rules from the console cluster, which is the control plane, and orchestrating across it. So it's kind of like software-defined networking, but you can't really call it software-defined networking. It's not layer 3, layer 2, layer 3.
Yeah.
It's more like layer 4 and layer 7.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about your background. I mean, you've worked at a number of institutions in real life and implemented virtualization and software-defined networking and a bunch of different areas. So you've seen some shit go down. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the thing is that I wished for a long time that I had one view, right? I wish I could do this easily and just say, hey, my intent is to stop API from talking to web or API from talking to database. I wish I could do this really easily. And it turns out it's not that it's not that difficult here because it's layer 7 and to a certain degree layer 4. And we make it easy, right? From an operational standpoint. So it's operational complexity that makes it extremely difficult to sometimes do these migrations from on-premises to cloud.
Oh yeah.
Kubernetes. Yeah. Yep. So, that's basically kind of the overview of Consul very, very quickly, but to show kind of why this was really useful in this story, there will be code. So part of this is that in this particular situation, you'll notice here that there is on-prem. So there's a console console control plane in the on-premise deployment, right? So this is specifically on-premise. But what's really cool is that you can say, I also have a console control plane in the cloud as well. So I can basically say, hey, this console, these two clusters, these two control planes can connect to each other and talk to each other. And the result is that they have visibility into the services across both, which is really interesting. So here I have on-premise, I just switch it, and you can see that I have a couple of services, web, API.
Rosemary, before somebody chimes in from the audience, I don't care. But some people it starts to bug them when people say when the people don't say on premises.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be funny, but that wasn't very funny. Anyway, keep going. It's premises. Stick with on-prem. Yeah.
On-premise, on-premises. A lot of people have I say data center most of the time, but a lot of people have a very difficult time with this.
We're all friends here. I'm just kind of kidding. That was supposed to be jocular, but it ended up kind of. I ended up like you just like shat on the floor or something. Anyway, keep going.
No, it's okay. No, I'm just reading the question. So, intent-based networking. Most networking. Someone asked a question about what's intent-based networking. Most networking, when you talk about network policy, is 10.0.0.0/24 shouldn't talk to 10.1.0.24, something like that. And the problem is that you don't understand the intent, right? Why are you telling me that these two subnets can't talk to each other? What's the point, right? And so I think that it's really difficult sometimes in network engineering to say this particular IP address range or this network belongs to this application. There's no description of why. There's no real description of what. And it's an extremely difficult thing. Most people do it through spreadsheets, actually, or CMDB, so the configuration management databases.
Mm-hmm.
And what's different about intent-based networking is that
everybody here has a very clean set of firewall rules that are not years old and do not have entries that they're afraid to remove because they don't know what would happen. Anyway, everyone here, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Firewall entries, they're so beautiful and clean. I love a good, clean firewall entry, but it's like a unicorn. I've never really actually seen it. But it's hard to say that a network belongs to something. It's hard to assess impact. So intent is saying, these are the networks or these are the resources that belong to this service, right? So it could be web, it could be API, you could call it transactions, you could call it payments, but you clearly understand that it's mapping to a specific intent. So you're able to say, web can't talk to database, but app can talk to database if you're going through like a 3-tier app. So it's a very kind of different model of network policy.
Chris, does that make sense? You don't have to answer. Just nod your head. We can't see you.
Yep. Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So intent is actually really powerful because in this case, I'm saying I have some kind of on-prem, I have cloud, right? And, where do they go? How do I know if I'm going to on-prem? And to be honest, my fake service here, which is a fake service, it has the web component, which is what you're seeing right now. And what's saying it's connecting to the API on-prem. And the reason why it's connecting to localhost is it's connecting through that data plane. So that client or that proxy that you've seen in this here, this is a client, proxy, etc. It's connecting to localhost, and localhost is going to figure out where it's got to go, right? So in this case, it's all going to on-prem. And what I could do is, if I wanted to live really dangerously and actually apply some configuration, what I'm going to do is apply first a resolver. And what it actually will say is that it will clarify some intent, right? Because otherwise, in any kind of other network situation, I would say you're not allowed to go to cloud. And I would have to say the specific DNS and very specific address, right? So I have to say like 10 dot whatever cloud. You're not allowed to go there, or you are allowed to go there. And here, what I'm saying is, if the name is API cloud, API-cloud, I just go to the API service in my cloud data center. That's it. And the side effect of this, or the reason why this is actually pretty interesting, is that you can actually use it to split some of the traffic. So here, what I'm saying is that right now, 100% of my traffic is going to default, which is on-prem. And then there's also this lovely little piece here that says right now there's nothing going to API-cloud. Makes it really simple. And all I'm going to say is maybe I'll just add that there. So I'm just going to go in and say I'm going to go 50%. And let's live dangerously. All I have to say is maybe I'll just do 100% to my Kubernetes cluster. So keep in mind that it's all in the Kubernetes cluster right now. And I'm just going to split the traffic. All right, so hopefully this works. But the idea is that now my fake service will be pointing to cloud. So what's really neat about this is that I didn't have to look for the IP address of the cloud namespace. I didn't have to look for a DNS or setup load balancing to figure out where it was going to go. I pretty much just said to the proxies and to the data plane, hey, it's got to go to cloud, and it's got to go to this particular data center, which is in the cloud. So you can do a lot of powerful things with this. In the microservices space, if you're doing something with a bunch of containers in Kubernetes, you could also do additional traffic shaping like outlier detection. You can do circuit breaking, et cetera. So you have a lot of traffic management capability as well. Any questions?
So with, and not to get in too deep, we're going to hear a lot about, we're hearing a lot about service mesh. This kind of reminds me a little bit of the olden days when we did everything by hand. Or no, in the olden days we did bearskins and stone knives. With picking a, virtualization in the virtual stack, picking a virtual router, picking which set of NICs, which set of things inside the VM I'm going to install, which virtual router I'm going to use. Now, a few years later, it's one of those things where from far away, it's like, well, that seems too much detail. Kind of the middle ground is like, wait a minute, there's too many choices. And then when you're in it, it's like, well, the answer, what I should do this week is this is what I should do. And then there might be some, I'm following, release by release, patch by patch. And then the answer may eventually, hopefully settles down somewhere in this particular use case as I use this particular stack. So without drawing the analogy too close, where are we kind of from your perspective in the service mesh landscape journey? Because I see people complaining about Istio, complaining about service meshes in general, comparing the difference. I don't want to get into the comparison here, but too much, but and then a lot of people saying you don't need one. I talked with one of our speakers who's going to come up a little bit, who said it would be irresponsible to deploy without one. So and I don't know where are we in this, and how long is it going to take to settle down in your opinion, Rosemary?
Probably as long as it takes for the Kubernetes ecosystem to settle down, right? It's a pattern. I think it's a very useful pattern. It's got some really powerful ways that you can control traffic and in some ways mitigate risk in a variety of ways. You don't have to have it, but it sometimes just reduces the operational complexity just a little bit. But until it reduces it by a lot, right? It makes it super simple to deploy, to also see from a single point of view what kind of traffic you have, then I don't know. We'll see. To be honest, it's probably going to be a pattern that's going to be around for a while. But whether or not we see it at in mass scale production everywhere is going to be a different story.
Right. I don't know. Was that we prepped a little bit. I don't know. Do you have some more to talk about, or was that your demo so far?
That was it. I mean, I could go into way more, but
do you have an example for us in the cheap seats of a configuration file that might be show off a little bit more stuff?
Yeah, of course. So let me paste this in the chat. There is I'm going to paste this. I had this on Chrome before. Mesh.demo.js is, it has a set of slides and a full set of a walkthrough that we did at Velocity last week, I believe. And so that's going to have a lot of dense information. In terms of additional configuration, I can definitely share it right now if you've got time. But
yeah, we've got a couple minutes. I built in some time.
Awesome. So let me actually pop this open to this here.
Because again, sometimes just kind of looking through the file can give you a lot of give you a glimpse into like, okay, what's going on in the guts here.
Yeah, so this is the actual console configuration. So this is configuration of the control plane for console. So what you can see is that I've declared that my data center is on-prem. Right now I've only got one instance, so it's really not terribly complicated. I'm here saying turn on the service mesh capability, so it's enable true. There are a couple of IP addresses in here just to say, hey, advertise this. What you'll notice here is there's advertise address and advertise address WAN. So if you imagine this from a networking standpoint, your data NIC would be on this advertise address. That's with your clients, so that's usually within a data center. The WAN is across data centers. So your WAN would be more like a management NIC, so your management interface. So here I have a management interface that will connect with the other data center, which is cloud. And you can configure it as long as there's routing between the two, you can have any advertise address, generally speaking. And there are a lot of little configurations here and there. Like for example, we have a gateway, and the gateway kind of proxies locally. So it kind of controls the passing between data centers. So it's a little bit like a gate point to just say, hey, do you go to the other data center or not? So the configuration is pretty short.
Right. The cool. That gives us. I mean, clearly all the stuff is all the docs are, online, etc. Well, let me ask you this. I think I'm going to ask everybody this. Actually, you come from an IT background. And I'll stop you here. Is there anything as you're teaching people and as you're working with people and clients, is there anything that you find that people, traditional IT on-prem folks, aside from getting excited about terminology of on-premises versus on-prem, is there anything that they get excited, either don't get or have trouble grasping, or either do get or don't get or get excited about or can't get, or is it more, all this is just tech and it's just more of a process and culture issue of getting started?
I think it's a process and culture issue. I was a consultant for a period of time, and I would work with kind of the IT groups that initially they would not know how to code at all, right? And part of it was that they were exhausted. They had no time to learn it. They were fighting fires, and a lot of this wasn't, it wasn't to say that they didn't want to learn. It was just that they were very focused on the existing process that they did have. And it's hard to grasp and think differently about process when you don't know if it will turn out better or worse. And so it comes down to a lot of culture change and a lot of process too.
Yeah. Well, and we're not only become coders, but there is some DNA there about reliability and keeping things running, and there's a thinking style sometimes that I see out of infrastructure and IT that's a little bit different sometimes than a developer thinking style. And I don't know how to talk about it really, but there's definitely anyway, you get where I'm going. There's a lot of skill set to bring. It's a new set of tools, but all this can be mapped back to same. I mean, it's packets flowing around and things like that.
Yeah. And to be honest, it takes a lot for a developer as well to come in and learn this. It's important, right? It's hard to say to a development team, you need to start deploying your own queues. We're not managing them for you, right? So, the DevOps, ideas and philosophy, it's tricky. It goes both ways. It's hard. It's hard from a domain standpoint to bridge the gap between both.
Yeah. Nothing's a panacea. Well, hey, Rosemary, thank you very much for being with us. Really appreciate it. And I learned a little bit, and I'm actually kind of, I've actually been typing on the keyboard. I actually got Python up and running on my machine, and I'm actually made my first app up in AWS. I'm actually, so maybe this events can be turned into a series of people teaching me how to do stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody can reach out if they're curious. So.
Hey, so the HashiCorp team will be there in force at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con, and you can see them around the country, etc. Rosemary, and we had your Twitter handle up, and so folks need to get a hold of you, and we're also happy to put people in contact directly if on the back channel as needed. Rosemary, thanks. Hey, have a good one. Stay warm, etc.
Thank you.
Awesome. Let me put up our slide. Hey, so that was Rosemary Wang from HashiCorp, and that's her Twitter handle. We're all live here at TechReckoningFest5 on November 14th. Thanks for coming. And operate your own machine. There we go. Hey, so for the next segment here on Tech Reckoning Fest 5, it's November 14th. We're really, really pleased to welcome to us here our former colleague of mine, as well as the CEO of Platform 9. Ooh, I'm getting a little bit of chatter here, but we'll figure it out. Which is Suresh Ragaram. And so I'll pause here so that we can plug this in. And now we'll start. We'll welcome Suresh. Suresh, hey, howdy.
Hey, John, how are you doing? It's good to be here. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Okay, it looks like our audio connection has cleaned up. So, I'm getting a little bit of echo, but I'll mute myself, and hopefully we'll figure it out. Zoom is actually, fairly okay at figuring out this echo stuff, although it's always a little bit of a...
Let me do this. John, I'll switch to my headphones in case it's coming from my end. So let me just do that, okay? Give me a minute.
Yeah, okay. If you've got them right there, that's fine. Anyway, I worked with Platform 9 over the years a couple of times, and it's always been really a pleasure. They got their start doing managed operations with OpenStack, and now are working more as well with Kubernetes. At the time, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit, everyone was like, what are you doing putting a control plane in the cloud and connecting back to on-prem, or what, who will do this? Now kind of almost a standard option for deployments, but I thought super innovative and really interesting through the years. Suresh, are we there?
I'm here.
I think let's go with that, and just so we don't force Zoom to do its magic. Hey, so anyway, welcome again.
Hey, it's good to be here, and I'm excited to do this today.
So now you will be at KubeCon. You and the team you'll be there a little bit, I guess, towards the end of the week, but the team will be there at KubeCon next week.
We're there in force starting Monday. So, you'll see Platform 9 at the booth. We have a lot of our team there. Embarrassingly, I'm going to have to fly in Tuesday night because I have an important investor summit to attend, and requirements of my title and my job are such that I have to be at that event.
Yeah, I had a little company at one point, venture backed, and I got very expert in PowerPoints and brunches or steak dinners or whatever, but not very as much hands on. But we're going to stay a little bit technical here and talk about the market and talk about what y'all are doing. But first, I just wanted to talk to you, Suresh, a little bit about, about your, just want to talk to you a little bit about, you and what you're doing and what the company's doing. So maybe just give us the real super top level of Platform 9. We'll dig in later. And then, kind of your background a little bit and, kind of that sort of thing.
Okay, great. So, folks, I'm the co-founder and CEO at Platform 9. We're a 5-year-old startup. We're based in Mountain View. Just moved to Mountain View from Sunnyvale in the Bay Area in California. My co-founders and I were early engineers at VMware, and we started the company to make it easy for people who are interested in using open source cloud technologies to run them and scale them more effectively. So who we sell to is we cater to organizations that are looking to leverage open source cloud technologies such as Kubernetes and OpenStack, either to run private clouds or edge clouds or hybrid clouds. And they want to do that fast, and they want to do that quickly and easily without having to build a massive army of professional services and consultants and engineers. So we offer a SaaS control plane that takes the operational pain out of this. And this is where, John, our story goes back, right? When I was starting the company, an investor who I shall not name said, look, you want to do SaaS to do what? Nobody's ever going to buy like a SaaS-based like cloud control plane to manage like on-premises environments. Are you crazy? Well, it turns out now with systems like Google Anthos and VMware's Tanzu announcement, they're following exactly in the same operational paradigm and architectural paradigm that we've established. So we're very excited about what we're doing. We're seeing a lot of growth in our business and a lot of momentum with some great companies across the world. I'd love to tell you more about that. And John and I, we're back at VMware. So my co-founders and I were all early engineers at VMware. I was there for 12 years and really grew up there before starting the company.
So it's been a journey. I mean, 5 years in is both just a blink of the eye, and yet all sorts of things can happen in the ecosystem. I don't know. So you're there. I mean, one reason to be in Silicon Valley is the weather. It is a little bit cloudy here in Half Moon Bay. I'm probably 40, 50 miles away from you, but it looks like you're outside. There was no cold snap, so that's nice. I don't. You're in
Mountain View.
Yeah, and there's so much. The joke is, right, you can always quit your job and walk across the street, and there's another company. So you're in a huge ecosystem. I mean, it's the funny thing is, these things also go in fashion, even like tech, the companies go in fashion, right? There's like consumer-focused companies, and sometimes people don't understand enterprise-focused companies. Some would claim that even companies like Google don't understand the enterprise, and are learning. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I don't know, how is it? I mean, is there been anything surprising to you about either the speed, lack of speed, of adoption of some of these technologies, the transition from OpenStack, I don't know, just life in Silicon Valley as a founder versus, the founder mode versus engineering mode? That's not even a question, Suresh, but I'll throw it at you.
I'd love to share some thoughts, John. Look, I think there's a few things that surprised me. The first one was it felt like there's both a lot of interest in Kubernetes and containers. Our product, our managed Kubernetes solution, has been generally available for 2 years now, but it's also pretty early. It's interesting, right? In technology-intensive companies, it's actually progressed quite a bit. But if you look at the rest of the enterprise, it's actually not made that big a dent yet. Now, there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of talk. But I think one of the huge problems that containers and Kubernetes have that VMware did not and VMs did not is the fact that any app just works in a VM. And it's also, I think, kudos to VMware for having done such a good job with the implementation that your app practically never knew it was running in a VM. Almost never do, right? So I think with containers, on the other hand, you have to deal with this change in paradigm in terms of taking existing apps and refactoring them to be microservices. And I think we've been surprised. I think a lot of the community has been surprised by how complex microservices can be for a team that is used to developing traditional applications using three-tiered architectures and so forth. And it's a new game. It's a new way of thinking about how do you build system software and how do you scale them and run them. So a few things that have caught me by surprise. The real traction in containers and Kubernetes, I think, has taken longer to materialize because of, I think, this impediment, right? You can't just take what you have and run it in this brave new world. I think that's been a surprise. Some other things that surprised me along the way is learning, being an engineer by background, learning to, all about sales and marketing, and really understanding how do you take an idea that engineers understand and you break it down into a message that is more consumable by, buyers who care much more about outcomes. Execs care much more about outcomes. What does it do for me? Technical buyers, on the other hand, care much more about the nuts and bolts, about how does it work, how does it integrate with X, Y, Z. So I think that's also been a massive learning journey for me personally through this process.
Yeah, I agree. That's at some level, who cares about Kubernetes? But at another level, I got to care about it very deeply. And not only do I do that, I got to care about this quarter's release versus 2 quarters ago, and what's broken and what's not broken and all that sort of stuff. I don't know. And so yeah, I imagine it's been a journey. I think we're going to talk a little bit about we're going to get into tech here in just a second, talk about KubeVirt actually, which was you thought would be interesting to talk about today. But I'm just kind of curious now. And so you do a lot of traveling as CEO. You're there in the middle of a lot. It's always, I know the velocity of what you have to do, whether the market's there or not, you have to keep moving as the market moves. I don't know. How do you? We talked about burnout with Rosemary and travel. How do you keep grounded? How do you keep your brain clear? How do you make it through the craziness of modern life?
It's I'm in the Bay Area, John, and like you, I'm a road biker. I'm often in the peninsula, up and down foothills, going into the Santa Cruz Mountains or up along Alpine Road and Santa Road, Portola Valley. So that's my weekend relief. Suffering up Montebello, the 10% gradient. It's a 2,500 foot climb, which for me is quite a bit at an 8% incline. That tends to make other suffering. It puts it in context, right? And I think that's my getaway. The other thing that I really find keeps me going is when I talk to customers, and I really enjoy the process of, taking technology, but really applying technologies to people's problems and organizations' problems and helping them with that. That's exciting. That's fun. And, I just enjoy that so much that I guess I tune out a lot of the other stuff, which is hard. And I think it's very gratifying when you're able to make a big difference in an organization's experience, or in their costs, or in their modernization pace, or in their ability to transform. That's incredibly gratifying, and it gives you a tremendous sense of purpose and fulfillment. And that also is the fuel that lets you go climb the next hill, right? So those are some things. And then there's new and emerging macro things, right? I mean, I've had at VMware, I was very much in the engine room. Like I felt
exactly,
I joined the company I was an engineer when we were about 150 people. And then when I left, we were about 13,000 people at VMware. And I felt like I was down in the engine room, and I just didn't have any idea about where the ship was going, what's happening in the ocean out there. And at Platform 9, for example, I get to see some really interesting things. And I'm very thankful and grateful for that. One example, John, just to talk about it is, this evolution from private cloud, for those of us old enough to know it, there was a product called Lab Manager, which I think in many ways, Akimbo Systems was a startup that VMware acquired, was a very first private cloud-ish solution, seeing that evolve into vCloud Director, which my team contributed to pretty heavily. Then seeing the rise of new systems like OpenStack and Kubernetes, and then seeing the enterprise adoption into public clouds and how that is changing the conversation in terms of saying, look, private clouds are one thing, but now in the last year to 2 years, there's a new and exciting phenomenon around distributed infrastructure environments, right? What people broadly call the edge cloud. We're literally seeing that happen in front of us right now. And that's super exciting,
Super cool. I'll keep going, and then I want to ask about Edge. Keep going.
Yeah, on Edge, as luck would have it, it turns out that our architecture, if you think about Platform 9 is like a centrally SaaS managed control plane, which one of the side effects of that architecture is that you tend to get a central control plane that can handle distributed endpoints very, very well. And you go read something like the Gartner papers on Edge, and you're like, look, Edge is hard because traditional data center management processes don't apply. You really need a way to bootstrap machines with remote management, deploy software configurations, virtualization systems, containerization systems using remote management, and manage many distributed sites very effectively. And it turns out that we've just been really fortunate that, we had no idea about the edge when we started the company. But now, all of a sudden, we have massive pull from the edge, right? And edge-related opportunities. It's a very early market, but it's interesting. And it's fun. That's a lot of fun, is to see the shifts in the industry from private cloud to hybrid and the adoption of public clouds to now seeing the new and emerging edge category. That's incredibly fun to me.
That seems very cool, and I totally get it. And the fact that you are actually you've learned your CEO lesson, because you slipped into that kind of company thing, right? Very, very slickly. But you didn't go too salesy, because you kept it at the architecture layer, which was good. Sometimes we joke we need like a bell when somebody starts to get too much hand wavy marketing. But that was actually really good. I was kind of curious what you thought of an edge, but I take it. Yeah, it's because there's a lot of edges, and sometimes people get super confused. Is this IoT? Is this on chips? But these are when you have a bunch of compute that's closer to something, maybe it's a warehouse or retail or a boat, but maybe with limited bandwidth connection or intermittent connection, or in some way you can't just run the stuff in the central data center for either for convenience or cost or connectivity or security or a bunch of different reasons. I just made that up. I don't know. Is that a good edge definition?
Yeah, I think edge is also very broad, John. So one of my problems with edge is, like, I think we are relevant to a much smaller segment of edge.
Yeah.
I think there's many different types of edge environments. It's a little bit like hybrid, right? I mean, hybrid is, well, everything under the sun. So, and we're not a good fit for everything under the sun, right? So, but let me give you maybe a canonical example is, maybe two or three examples that I'll give you where we see, it's exciting for us given where we sit, right? One is you look at something like 5G. And because of the nature of 5G, you end up requiring a lot more distributed sites that need to be managed with essentially racks of compute. It can be as little as half a rack or a rack, but it can be as many as a few racks, right? But the problem is you tend to have like tens and maybe even hundreds of these sites per customer who's consuming one 5G function, right? And now the question is, is this the service provider as the customer? Service provider. It would be a service provider who's the customer. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how does the service provider, get cloud into all these, how does the cloud go there, right? And that's an interesting example. The other one is, I think retail is, there's applications that work very well when you lift and shift them entirely into the cloud and you centralize them into the cloud. But there's also new and emerging technologies. You look at AI, ML, you look at AR, you look at VR, and you look at packet inspection applications that are latency sensitive, either because of the volume of data or because of the requirement to do low latency processing. You end up needing to distribute computing, and retail is an interesting vertical to us because there's, you think about foot traffic. Take an example of your favorite retail store and think about the kind of foot traffic that's happening there, and think about the kinds of computation these stores are going to become digital, right? And they're going to do a lot more computation to personalize the experience to each individual and shopper, and to do better analytics and do better, engagement at the store. You think about it, right? I mean, you go to your Amazon website, you get a highly personalized experience, but you don't at all get a personalized experience when you walk into a retail store. It's the same. It's the same shade of vanilla. Why is that different, right? Shouldn't these be somewhat similar in that there's a greater degree of personalization? Now, you look at personalization in retail and you say, look, that requires compute to be highly distributed. Mm-hmm. Now, again, the question is, how do you do that, right? I mean, do you run cloud? How do you run the cloud there? Are people just going to run VMware there, right? And that's where I think those are, I think, some very specific examples. And I don't know how else to call it other than edgy. Yeah. But I think we'd love to see a clearer term, because we think of ourselves as being relevant to what is called the thick edge, because the thin edge around, very lightweight sure. ARM gateways and IoT devices, which we are not a good fit for.
Let's do this here. Two questions. So one observation and a question, because I can't help myself. I think retail, there's some privacy concerns that are coming up with the surveillance stuff coming up more and more and tracking stuff. But even if you take that away, I don't think I can't conceive of stores, the retail having less compute. Like even if you're just talking operations and inventory control and traffic management and back office and personnel management, there's going to be more and more local compute. It's just going to happen, even if you're not tracking every shopper or anything like that. So that's super interesting. I love, or they're going to be having to talk back to the office in a more sophisticated way, the head office. But that also brings up, so Vong had a question in our chat, which is, there's the concept of remote office, branch office, right? Is there in your mind, is thick edge just the new robo? Is there a particular characteristic maybe requiring more compute, or I don't know, what are your thoughts, Suresh?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I don't think we're a good fit for robo, the traditional robo use case. When I think of the kind of edge customers that we work with, these are people who want a cloud API, and they want to do DevOps, and they want to do like rapid software delivery and application operations and rapid software delivery and new versions of software delivery. And that's why they want a cloud API, right? If all you had is a robo, you may not at all, if it's serving like a file and print like a function locally, you probably are not going to update that super frequently, right? I mean, you might do security patches, but you might not do much more. So specifically from a Platform 9 selfish point of view, we think that the kinds of edge customers that we cater to are the people who value having some kind of cloud API so that they can push new software capabilities and experiences more rapidly. And I think if you take that out, I think the lines between edge and robo are not really clear anymore.
Okay, I think functional delineation. I think that makes. That was Vong's comment there. I think that makes sense. At least it's a start of a functional category. And let me clean up. So hey man, let's for a couple of minutes. I am going to. There we go. Sorry, it's all live, man. Which is the fun part. And we'll get to Nigel here in a second. Hey, so we've got, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes-ish. We were going to also talk about KubeVirt, which I would love to kind of grab into if you can give us a quick, because you thought, I mean, everybody here virtualization, they do some containers, but I would love to kind of get into KubeVirt a little bit. If you can give us a good little intro.
Yeah, I thought, I could use a slide deck that we recently shared with this. We did a webinar recently with the CNCF on KubeVirt, and I thought it'd be interesting to talk about it in that context. So, if you guys can see my screen,
yep.
Ironically, my Kubernetes engineers were like, okay, it's like we're going back in circles, right? I mean, like going back to VMs. And I thought it would be also interesting because at VMworld a couple of months ago, obviously VMware announced two interesting capabilities. One was Tanzu, which is very much like Platform 9. The other is project specific. And a lot of your panelists might already know this, but there is actually an open source project in the Kubernetes ecosystem. It's a sandbox project called KubeVirt, which has been around for at least 2 years now, if not longer, that has very similar motivations, right? So I'll go through this relatively quickly. So KubeVirt is a way to run virtual machines on Kubernetes. And it reuses, it gives you, and it does that by using a set of CRDs. It's basically an operator, a Kubernetes operator. A Kubernetes operator, you can think of it as a way to extend Kubernetes to operate. Kubernetes, you can think of it as it's an orchestrator. In other words, an orchestrator operates on standard like units of compute, right, which are Docker containers. Kubernetes has a construct called operators, which lets you conceptually extend Kubernetes to operate third-party constructs, which Kubernetes natively itself may not know of. And KubeVirt is an operator that extends Kubernetes to orchestrate virtual machines while making it, integrate well with Kubernetes. What does it reuse with Kubernetes? It reuses scheduling, storage, networking, the Kubernetes API, kubectl, the CLI, and monitoring and so forth, right? Why is this interesting, right? And I think it's interesting in a lot of the similar ways that the specific is interesting. I thought it was useful to see maybe what people who are using KubeVirt are saying about it, right? So here's 3 data points, and there's more. If you go into the community forums, you'll see there's more. There's a dev test like use case where, hey, for production, we want to run Kubernetes on bare metal, but we want to make it easy for developers to spin up like, isolated test and dev like Kubernetes clusters to do ad hoc testing. And for that, it's nice to give them a set of VMs where they can be partitioned from each other and they don't get in each other's way. Also, they can, the Cloudflare example is to make sure that they're testing in an environment that is really representative of what the production workloads look like, right? With a virtual machine, you can configure the environment to look exactly a certain way because you can go in and change the operating system, the drivers, and
right. This could be legacy. These could be legacy apps in this case.
That is actually the most interesting one, right? I mean, the NVIDIA example here is saying, and we have a lot of customers who come to us and say this, hey, we want to go all in on Kubernetes, but we're going to have somewhere between 5 and 30% of our workloads remain as virtual machines, probably forever or for a long time, longer than I can see, right? How do I manage that? Do I need to run VMware separately and treat Kubernetes and VMware as two different islands, or do I need to run OpenStack separately and VMware and treat OpenStack and Kubernetes as two different islands? Wouldn't it be nice if I had a way to kind of say, look, Kubernetes is our operating cloud operating platform, and there's a way by which we can do kind of most of the important operations. We can provision VMs, we can tear them down, we can do HA for them, right? Some of the most basic operations, we can hook them up to a network, we can configure a VM profile, so to speak, like a flavor of resource configuration to it. Wouldn't it be nice if I could do that? And that's, I think, a great use case for KubeVirt. And that's where we're going.
And but folks, we mentioned Tanzu. I mean, it seems like, okay, so we're using some different APIs. We're going to manage the infrastructure slightly differently. Tanzu is a control plane entirely from cluster manager, et cetera. Project Pacific, they're building some of the same APIs and capabilities into vSphere itself. This is, I suppose one would say, similar spirit, right? But using some other native Kubernetes. It's a virtualization API, or a VM-like API, right? For Kubernetes.
I'm just skipping through these slides super quickly. I think conceptually, John, look, Tanzu is different. Tanzu is a lot like Platform 9, right? Which is a cloud control plane. It's a single control plane.
Yes.
Kubernetes clusters everywhere else. But Pacific is a lot like KubeVirt. Now, I don't have access to the details on Pacific, so I've seen the demos and I've seen, I think, some of the blogs out there, but I haven't had, maybe they published more technical specs, but I haven't seen it yet. And so the idea is, look, in KubeVirt, the constructs are, there's a virtual machine object. And in Pacific, I'm trying to remember, there was this notion of a native container, right? I mean, there's like a container running natively on ESX was a certain, object and so forth. And basically, Pacific was trying to embed a Kubernetes-like cluster manager at some level in an ESX server and say that you can now spin up containers natively there. And what is not clear is how unified is the operating experience across VMs and the containers that are running in those special, work isolation zones in ESX. I'd imagine it ends up looking a lot like KubeVirt, where you have an object that represents a virtual machine, you have an object that represents a container, you have a way to instantiate such an object. You can basically provision a flavor, which is a way to say you should have, X storage parameters, Y network parameters, some custom parameters such as here's a boot disk, here's a network bridge that you should be on, and here's some additional flags that you should be having. Choosing like an ephemeral disk versus a persistent disk. So these are all things that you can do with KubeVirt, right? So it's conceptually very similar to Pacific. And the idea with KubeVirt is, look, you can basically use one command line, one API. You can use the kubectl API to orchestrate almost all of your infrastructure constructs across VMs and containers. You don't get all the advantages of microservices with your legacy applications, which are running in VMs. Like let's say you have a traditional scale-up application as opposed to a scale-out application, and it's running in a VM, you won't be able to do some things with it, right? So you'll need to rely on HA in a traditional sense as opposed to scale-out replica-based HA and failovers and horizontal pod auto scaling and so forth. but you get to orchestrate it with one unified platform, and you're bringing up pods, right? You're bringing up containerized microservices workloads in pods, but you're also able to bring up like Windows VM workloads in pods. I don't think we have the time for this today, John, but on YouTube, if you go search for KubeVirt CNCF, you see a video from Platform 9 where there's a video of booting a Windows VM using the Kubernetes command line running in libvirt KVM running on top of a pod in a container.
And so you're using KVM, and of course this could be on bare metal then. This could be Kubernetes on bare metal in this case, or in a cloud or wherever. You're nested a little bit.
Exactly. So you know the people who want to run, like customers that we work with that want to provide a way to run their apps which are not going to be containerized, right? They often want to run KubeVirt to run VMs on the bare metal. In other words, you're taking a physical machine, you're booting it up with a certain Linux image. You're running KubeVirt there so that you're running KVM in a container image, but you can orchestrate it all through the kubectl command line and to the Kubernetes API.
Makes sense. I mean, there's actually an active discussion in the industry, and I see a little bit of spill on Twitter of at the end of the day, are we going to end up? How much of this is going to end up on bare metal? How much of this is going to end up on a platform like vSphere or the public cloud hypervisor or something? Which is, I think the answer will be, as most of these things are, it depends on your needs. And is that fair?
I think personally, I feel like look, VMs aren't going to go away. Okay, VMs are going to stay around. I think I remember, John, in 2015 when Docker was all the rage. There was all this proclamation. I'll not name the person again, but I was at a founder dinner with the venture investors at VMworld 2015, where the founder was very belligerent, saying, "Oh, VMs are dead. Like, I don't understand why they should live. VMs should completely die." And look, one of the beautiful things about a VM is that it is very forgiving, right? Anything that can run on x86 compute runs in a VM, and that's beautiful, right? So let's not underestimate the importance of the long tail, right? I mean, in the enterprise, mainframes still run today, right? So let's not kid ourselves. And the ROI of taking an app that's running in production, that you don't want to modernize simply because it's an app that's running, it's sunk cost, it's depreciated, and you want to build new and existing capabilities, exciting capabilities using containers and microservices. That old app, you might keep it running in a VM forever simply because it's not worth transforming it into microservices anytime soon. So in that world, we think it's very interesting to be able to run VM and containers and give people the choice of saying, listen, you can manage using a new cloud API, right? That's the Kubernetes API. And you have a way to manage your traditional workloads, but also your new workloads, and give them, that actually makes it easier for them to adopt new, helping them take their existing and bringing them under management, and then encouraging them about the benefits, incremental benefits that you get when you do microservices for new applications, will actually encourage the use of microservices and make it more accessible in the enterprise, beyond the Silicon Valley bubble, right? Beyond the West Coast bubble. I think that's a very real problem we have today.
I want to, it's super interesting. There's a question and I think that's true. And I think that there is a lot of friction with Kubernetes right now. It's complicated. It has a lot of sharp edges. It's rapid development. At KubeCon, I was just looking at the announcements that are going to come out next week and under embargo, I can't talk about. And, there's companies I know, there's companies I don't know. There's crazy amount of stuff going on in the ecosystem, and it has to settle out, or that mass market of real people in non techno places running real apps that they need to do to get their business done are going to be adopting this next generation of stuff. I actually wanted to pivot two questions. One, we do have a question on chat about the cluster API, which is coming out of the cluster lifecycle SIG of Kubernetes, and I think that's a little bit of a newer API, and I think KubeVirt predates the cluster API. Is that, I'm not, again, my knowledge is thin deep. I'm skin deep here on this one. Do you know, Suresh, is that the case?
Yeah, they're both I think both are two years old or so. I think the cluster API is the project that we've been involved in. What the cluster API lets you do is it lets you use Kubernetes constructs. It's almost like an extension of Kubernetes to let Kubernetes deploy and manage cluster lifecycle. So you can deploy new clusters using the Kubernetes API. You can, scale clusters and reconfigure clusters using the Kubernetes API and so forth.
So that's a more way of organizing more cluster in a cluster in this case. See, this is where my skin deep is too thin.
I can help.
A cluster is a set of pods, or a cluster is a set of servers, instances.
So a cluster is a set of servers on which the Kubernetes API becomes available,
Gotcha.
On which you can deploy application workloads using pods. Those pods can be microservices pods running in containers, or those pods can, with KubeVirt, be traditional applications or applications that require to run in a VM. So in that sense, the cluster API and the KubeVirt are not mutually exclusive. They're complementary.
They're a slightly different place. Gotcha. Yeah.
Exactly. The cluster API makes it more standardized to manage the life cycle of clusters. How do you deploy clusters? How do you scale clusters? How do you troubleshoot? And how do you tear down clusters and so forth? Its life cycle management of clusters becomes easier, which is good. I think it helps make Kubernetes operations easier.
Hey, before we leave, I did want to, Suresh, Platform 9 is in a very interesting position in that you are running your service and you're running people's stuff in production, and so you have a deep insight into how things work and are things working. And I didn't know, maybe it might be interesting to leave us with your thought of kind of, where we are. We touched on this a little bit where you're seeing it in the customers, but I don't know how, if I'm used to, how are you and customers dealing with this life cycle, this quarterly life cycle? There's no long-term support in Kubernetes still. Kubernetes, like I said, there still are all these new CDRs and changes and all these SIGs, things are, and they're breaking things, and then versus, OpenStack still useful in certain places, vSphere obviously useful in a lot of places. People run Azure Stack, et cetera. I don't know. Do you have a perspective on where we are? You say a few words maybe on stability and keeping up, and how do you keep running a red queen race from a customer perspective? Keep up with all this stuff. I don't know. Maybe I'd love to hear a little bit of your insight into the responsibility of running people's production services.
Yeah, look, John, we sit in a unique place in the stack, right, where we're managing more than several hundreds of thousands of cores of compute globally across some very large enterprise customers and service provider customers. And the interesting thing is this, right? When I look at our internal quality metrics around Kubernetes, partly owing to the path complexity in Kubernetes, we have customers who want to use it on bare metal, who want to use it on VMware, who want to run it on OpenStack, on KVM, who want to run it on Amazon, on Azure, and on Google. Okay, and I haven't even gotten to the long tail service providers yet. And these 6 options, each of those involves options, right? You can configure storage this way, or you can configure networking this way. You can choose some CNIs, right? So there's a very high degree of path complexity with Kubernetes. To add to the quarterly cadence, security vulnerabilities, new versions coming out, and the integrations with application services, right? So what I see is that Kubernetes is still in a very, very early stage, and operationally, our quality metrics in terms of Kubernetes stability versus OpenStack is actually worse. And now our OpenStack product has matured over years of work, and it's something where customers are actually really happy with, contrary to what industry reputation for OpenStack is. It shows what is possible when you have a highly automated operational process. And Kubernetes is heading down the same path, but it's where our OpenStack product was 3 years ago. And to me, it just shows that the integration complexity and the operational complexity around Kubernetes is very high, which is why projects like the Cluster Lifecycle project are so important, because I think they'll bring more maturity into it, and they'll tame some of the path complexity in Kubernetes in the coming year or so.
That is interesting, and I think that's a little bit, surprising, maybe controversial. And no hate on OpenStack. It was there at the summit a few years ago, and people, again, if that's your use case, if you need that, it's great. It's awesome. We talked about Edge, right? There people are doing interesting stuff. There's a big enough ecosystem that it's fine. It's not abandonware at all. But that's really interesting, and that's a little bit not surprising, but I am also starting to hear, again, I'm an observer via media, via conversations like this, via conversations with customers. And, on Twitter, et cetera, people who are working at the bleeding edge, I mean, they're starting to raise their fingers with Band-Aids on them and go, I got cut here. And this is why. And so that's a really, as a practitioner, that's a super interesting part of the conversation. I do think a lot of the longer tail should wait, because you can hurt yourself pretty bad. But as an engaged professional, this is the right time to jump in and kind of get your hands dirty. I'm mixing metaphors. We're cutting ourselves and getting our hands dirty at the same time. But anyway, I think it's a very I'll be interested. Maybe we'll loop back with you, Suresh, after the conference to talk about. I'm interested in, again, where people are on their buying journey and production journey, and what kind of conversations you get there versus. I don't want to geographically shame anybody at a smaller conference in a different location. Right?
Yeah, I'm trying to ignore Wong's comment, but that's funny. John, look, I think it is exciting. This is also the one reason why I think a lot of the people who are actually looking to run in production today are using systems like GKE or EKS, or frankly, that's the reason why they reach out to Platform 9, is because they want to be able to focus on how do I containerize, how do I build new microservices, as opposed to how do I build all this, focus my time on building the platform, right? Which is, for many people, undifferentiated lifting. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, cool. I look forward to, thanks for joining us here. That was both educational in a couple of different ways, and I really enjoyed our conversation. So thanks a lot.
John. Yeah. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
And likewise, if folks need to get a hold of Suresh or the Platform 9 team, we're happy to put you all in touch. And this has been, you're listening to the Tech Reckoning Fest 5 here, November 14th, 2019, right before KubeCon. Suresh Ragaram, CEO of Platform, co-founder of Platform 9. Thanks a lot. Oh. All right. Okay, we're going to welcome our last guest. We're going to have a really nice conversation, fireside chat, as they say, with Nigel Poulton of MSB.com and NigelPoulton.com. Trainer, man I've known for many years. Really pleased to see what he's up to and what's going on in the world of Kubernetes from somebody who is, if not on the coalface, at least on the what we'll call it, the coalface. You're not necessarily putting a lot of stuff into production, I think, but you are talking to a heck of a lot of people who are and building content around and teaching people. So Nigel, welcome to the. I was going to say welcome to the show. Welcome to this event. Thank you.
That's cool. Thank you, John. It's actually it's a huge privilege. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, hey, like I say, it's been interesting. I think we're going to hit it from 2 points here. One is your kind of personal journey of being a content producer. You're full time doing training and courses and books. You'll be at KubeCon this next week, doing some workshops and stuff, as well as kind of, you get to see. You're an infrastructure background person. You get to see what is going on and what people have trouble with, what people are interested in, and you have to try to keep up, which is probably your second full-time job.
Yeah, you know what? To that point, I say all the time, I live and breathe this cloud native, containers, Kubernetes, all this kind of stuff. Literally, it's what I think of when I get out of bed on the morning, and quite often it's what I fall asleep thinking to at night. And if you were to ask my wife, I'm sure a lot of people be in like a similar situation here, but if you were to ask her, she would say I spend an unhealthy and unholy amount of time with this stuff. But I always feel like I'm playing catch up. I mean, this stuff it's a ride, I'll tell you that. It is iterating like at warp speed.
It is, it's interesting. Like I say, as an observer, that's a challenge. But let's talk about you for a second. I mean, if somebody just on chat just said, "Hey, Nigel's book got me started." You got into this. You were doing some Pluralsight stuff, or maybe some training. You were blogging back in the day, and you jumped in feet first. I believe it was with a Docker book. I don't know. Can you just talk a little bit about maybe that transition and kind of what your journey has been like? And doing all these. And so now you have a whole. People can go to NigelPoulton.com or MSB. You can do all sorts of you got books and we'll talk about all that stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I don't want to take too much time talking about the content and stuff that I produce. It's out there. People can find it. I think like quite a long time ago, I think Docker was at something like version 0.7. And I started playing around with it. And I found myself at an HP Discover event. I was a guest of Calvin Zito, if you know Calvin. And I was sat at lunch with him one day, and I think, if I remember right, the very first DockerCon was going on at the same time. And I said to Calvin, I said, look, Calvin, mate, I love you. You know I do. And, you know, the event's great and we're enjoying ourselves. But I just got to admit, I wish I was DockerCon instead. And we had a bit of a laugh about that. But I think certainly since Docker 0.9, I just threw myself at it. And I think the journey is something that probably everybody that's listening now and will potentially listen to the recording will be able to, or maybe this kind of journey will resonate with them. I just felt like sea change was coming, and it reminded me of the very first time I heard of VMware, like, I don't know, however many years ago, but it really did. It felt like, you know, the first time I saw VMware, I thought, yeah, you know what? This is game changing and it just makes sense. And I felt the same thing with containers. And I think, like, I'm super fortunate, like everybody, you know, that we live in a time where access to technology and access to be able to teach yourself and to learn is just at an all-time greatest, you know. I think back to when I was trying to learn Windows NT4 for my MCSE and how hard it was to spin up infrastructure with CDs, and you wanted to break things, but you knew that you had like 6 hours to rebuild your domain afterwards. And, you know, it was on a couple of dusty old compact PCs in the corner of the bedroom that...
I bet they were not quiet either.
Yeah, no, they were noisy, yeah. Whereas now we've got, you know, so many cloud-based resources and things. There's books, there's videos, there's hands-on stuff that can help you learn. We just live in such a great time to tinker with technology and to grab hold of your own career, really. And honestly, like I said before, it's super hard to keep up. I mean, I was telling you not so long ago that I looked at the KubeCon agenda, and I live and breathe this stuff, right? And I'm just looking at some of the stuff on the agenda, and I'm like, I don't even know what some of this stuff is. That's how fast, you know, the core Kubernetes project is iterating, but the ecosystem and the community and what they're contributing, it's like, I want to say, this is going to sound cheesy, right? But it's a bit of a golden age for sort of infrastructure technology. And I really believe that anybody who is into VMware and infrastructure and, you know, software-defined networking and storage and anything like that, if they've not looked at Kubernetes yet, take a look at it, give it a chance, and honestly, you'll fall in love with it. Because I was one of these people who I grew up watching like sci-fi stuff on the TV and just dreaming of living in a day where I was surrounded by amazing technologies. That sounds super cheesy, Hidson. I'm really
sorry. Yeah. Well, I when I was a kid too, I saw Mr. Spock there writing YAML like a future person, and I was really impressed too.
Yeah. But no, I just real quick, I feel like, you know, if you take something on like Kubernetes and it's new to you, it has the potential to bring the excitement of technology back into your life. And I'll go quiet for a bit now.
That's interesting, because it is, you know, you were on, we were just talking about some of the rough edges, and one of the things, I mean, so as we're taping this on November 14th, just yesterday, Docker just announced a corporate restructuring where a piece, the enterprise side went with Mirantis, which is you know, we're big in the OpenStack and in the Kubernetes world. So that's kind of more the enterprise arm now, and a lot of people and friends of mine are now over there. And then they're doubling down on the desktop tools and the hub and kind of just the individual tools, which is in some ways when you first start with Docker, right? That individual experience, that even if you're not doing CI/CD or whatever, that packaging and how easy it was, and oh my God, you know, so much simpler than a lot of different things. And that then can translate into production, and some of the ease of use that they really worked hard on struck me anyway. So I don't know, and I don't want to. And so Nigel, I'm just kind of curious. your perspective on, and so Kubernetes is known to be kind of ugly and hard to work with. That you pop the hood open, you stick your arm right down there in the engine sometimes. I don't know. Personal story, your perspective on the whole Docker kind of evolution, ease of use, I guess, didn't save them, or maybe the individual developers versus enterprise use case are so different that they couldn't exist in the same company. And also, you started with some Docker books and training. Now you've more recently, been focused more on the Kubernetes side, as was Docker, right? Everyone was building into that functionality. But I don't know, a little bit of perspective on this evolution and the ease of use.
Sure. So, I mean, I speak for myself here, okay? I don't speak on behalf of Docker Inc. or anybody. I think the announcement yesterday that they are spinning out the enterprise platform and that they're going to refocus more on the developer tooling and the developer experience strikes me personally as a smart move. Excuse me, in no way am I saying that they're not going through a difficult period at the moment. They certainly are. But I feel like this isn't the greatest comparison, okay? But, we all know that Microsoft not so long ago tried to do a lot of things that weren't their core competency. But then they weren't alone on that, okay? And they did a huge refocus. And I will hold my hand up and say, I think as an organization, like a lot of other organizations, okay, other options exist, they are rocking it at the moment. Back to their core competencies, really focusing, well, I say back to core competencies, I mean, they've kind of reinvented themselves with Azure and what have you, but they're focusing on the enterprise and they're focusing on what the kind of infrastructure and stuff that they've done well in the past and got rid of phones and, all that kind of stuff. I kind of wonder if Docker Inc. are doing a similar thing. And I've been asked a lot by people for well over a year now, John, are Docker going to go away? And what happens if they do? I'm talking about Big D Docker here, yeah, Docker Inc. Yeah. And the important thing is not so much the company. There's great people there and I love them, don't get me wrong, right? But I think everybody that's truly involved in it will say, they've changed the world, and what is important is the technology stack, and it's open sourced, and it's used heavily and hugely. I expect that to go nowhere other than further forward. Docker and Kubernetes, buzzword for you, okay? I'm not a fan of, but they're very they are very synergistic, okay? I know they've had some products that compete in the past, Swarm competing with Kubernetes and what have you. But Docker is the core runtime and the image format and things like that, which are what are at the heart of Docker, heavily leveraged by Kubernetes and by the wider cloud native ecosystem. So I think, and I'm not trying in any way to be a shill here, I think exciting times are still ahead for them there. And Kubernetes, look, all the things that we're doing now, if you go to events like KubeCon, a recurring theme is that we build on the shoulder of giants. And that's, core technologies like Linux and TCP/IP and things like that. And I would absolutely include containers, modern containers that were brought to us by Docker in that foundation that we're all building and rocking on at the moment. Yeah.
And in turn, that was built on a set of, Linux technologies, like LXC and other containers and jails, but they do, but beautifully packaged so that you could actually, that you could use it. And sure, you could still get down to that.
To mere mortals like us, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, as a trainer, let's get into. We got a couple topics here, but as a trainer, as a teacher, we were talking about some of the complexity and the golden age, the opportunity here. Is there any concepts in Kubernetes right now that people get tripped up on if they're coming from the more traditional world?
So like, I mean, it is a huge change, and you can either embrace that or you can be afraid of it. And I feel like if you're working in technology these days, and you're afraid of change, I don't mean to disrespect anybody here. You're probably in the wrong industry now, because change is the new normal. And actually, on the topic of change, so back in the old days, we would we'd have these huge old monolithic applications running on bare metal servers, some VMs sometime, well, a lot of the time, increasingly. But if you don't mind me saying, big old Oracle applications that we would plan huge holiday weekends to do upgrades on, and it would be all hands to the pump. Pizzas all weekend in the office. Nobody was allowed to go home. You had the CIO's cell number on speed dial, and you would do a change like this for your major finance apps and stuff like that, maybe once or twice a year. As you move into like the cloud native world and deploying microservices applications on Kubernetes, it's not easy. Okay, the bar is the bar for entry is quite high. There's a lot you've got to learn, but you will be moving to a world where you're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be stepping out of your comfort zone a lot if you're coming from a traditional environment. And again, you can either run from it or you can embrace it. But that kind of discomfort means things like lots and lots of changes going on. Applications that are massively distributed, huge flux on the network. Every application component is replicated multiple times. Everyone's got its own IP address. They can be short-lived. They've got to talk over a network. You're exposing all of your traffic. That kind of in the old monolithic applications used to be, you'd have all these different components. I'm going to be simplify this here, right? But in a single binary, let's just say, talking over Unix sockets or named pipes or whatever. And it was relatively secure compared to everything talking to everything else over an IP network. Getting really scary, really scalable. I'm going to say, John, for me, right? And I think for people who embrace change, it is so much more fun. If I think, if I was to dream tonight about going back 5, certainly 10 years, I would wake up with the shakes and a cold sweat.
Well, yeah, I love that wasn't a simple answer, but I think it's great. I think of myself as the observer here. Olden days where you're super proud of how long a server had lasted. Like we had inside VMware, we pass around some screenshots of servers that had been patched, but they'd been up for years, right? Super cool. And in fact, you didn't want anything to fall over, right? That's your whole job, is to not let anything reboot, right? Because God knows if it comes back. Or the war rooms, or where you're okay, we're going to do a release. I was involved in some of those just with web apps, and it's like, we're going to release this app. Everybody, tell your wives and children and spouses that they may never see you again. We're all going to go into this room and try to launch this thing, and that's terrible. Like, and then I see people who are very I forget what's the terminology that the DevOps that the state of that they use, the people who are super competent, and they're releasing code multiple times a day, these unicorns, right? And they're just having a lot of fun. You can release all the code you want on a Friday because there's no sweat, right? You can roll. Again, that's much more than Kubernetes. That's a huge amount of infrastructure and process and culture about being able to roll things out and roll things back and feature flags and da 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 da. But it's just a different. You still need these. I still maintain that IT still needs to bring kind of the big boy pants. That's a sexist term. The grown up pants to the table, like, and worry about compliance and security and uptime and how many bits are going to, that disk is not magic. There's IO, there's IOPS, and there's IO, and you're really tunneling. You're gonna multiplex all that traffic through that one link. Did you realize you're doing that? Because that's why the app's not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So there's some hardcore realities when the software hits the hardware, et cetera, and the architecture.
There are. Can I make a point then? So I'll say two things. So the first thing is those screenshots that you're passing around these days would be how many times in day you've updated an application component.
Love it.
If it's been on the same rev for a year or something like that, then it'd be like, really, what's wrong there? But I think if you're coming from a a more traditional infrastructure background, if you don't mind me using that term, you must bring that grown-up attitude that you talked about there. I think that most people on the call and that will listen to it afterwards will probably come from an ops background, maybe. So I'm going to feel free to say that it's true. Generally speaking, developers don't get production. Yeah, and if you're not careful, they will take risks, and it's finding that balance. And as an infrastructure person, you know, doing things like that, you have to be that voice of reason without, and this is what I want to say, what we got wrong in the past, and maybe it was more me than other people, okay, but was getting in the way of the business innovating. With hindsight, I did a little bit too much of that. I'm not saying that I got all powerful in my infrastructure roles and said, you know, I have the keys to production and thou shalt not do this because it's against corporate policy or whatever. For the sake of it, I mean. But sometimes, just with hindsight, I wish I had been a little bit more flexible and a little bit. Yes. So you will bring a lot to your cloud native sort of deployments and things like that. But be prepared to change a lot, and that's the fun of it, right? John, I want to say something as well, because I was listening in to when you were talking to Suresh.
Yeah.
That talking about adoption of Kubernetes now and some of the risks that come with that. I would just offer a slightly alternative view in maybe that the risks that I see are, if you don't get started soon, the potential of being left behind. What I would caveat it with, though, is to say, of course, I don't mean take your line of business production applications and refactor them onto microservices on Kubernetes as your first job, right? My advice is always to start as an individual and get your head around it, okay? I've got materials that help with that. There's plenty of stuff out there. We talked about this golden age of harnessing and learning and driving your own career, right? But then work on starting up a specialist team within your organization and take an easy application and containerize it and run it on Kubernetes and learn. And then take another one and another one, and then start to think, right, we're building some patterns here. We're building up some knowledge and some expertise within the organization. We've got a team, you know, a SWAT team or whatever. And then we start to push it out to the wider organization. That would be my advice, right? Because I do fear a little bit that, I just remember when I was working at organizations, like I've said sometimes, I was a little bit of a blocker to innovation sometimes.
No, but the no in innovation. We're not going to do that. Over my dead body.
And I'm trying to make up for that in a little bit now by saying, let's get on these new things now. Not the super new stuff necessarily, but the stuff that is generally, you know, that's GA within Kubernetes. Some of the more mature ecosystem products that plug into it as well, and start taking little bites and then start taking bigger bites, because you want to start this rolling. I know that you can start too early on some technologies, but I feel like we're past that now. Like the core workload stuff in Kubernetes. So around like running applications and the storage and the networking and things like that, I personally feel are at a maturity point where we should be starting at the very least to be taking small bites.
That's thank you, for taking our conversation from like some sort of a bar room drunken, more talking about the old days and wouldn't it be cool and trading over drinks sort of a conversation. But that was, I think it was interesting. It was kind of borderline. We were borderline between we should have been over drinks and interesting. I hope it stayed interesting. But to this concrete advice, because I mean, I was talking, so that's interesting because you do train organizations too and things like that, not just individuals. So that's an interesting perspective of how to take a bite, right? How to start with a project in a way that's a little bit different than you don't have to be all or nothing, et cetera. I was actually just talking with a consulting company this morning who they're like, one of our main priorities is that we're not a VAR. Like we're an expert in all this cloud native stuff, and we have to help people understand that we can help them. Exactly that, right? How can we? And somebody just mentioned it on chat, which made me think of it. How that we can actually help them, and because everybody's going to need help. Because again, do you just send off one engineer, or I mean, you try to find, like you say, you try to find something small and simple to kind of even to understand it. Even if you end up, it's not like you just invented a flying car. You just it might even be that the utility of what comes out of the first project may be exactly the same. It's not like this is magic, but at least you understood. I try to do that with all my projects, right? It might still be some, at least these, right? These Tech Reckoning Fest are very primitive. We just fire up Zoom and we go. But we're learning what works in live events. We're having great conversations. Et cetera, right? So you start, I guess, is the, hey, I'm going to code to that. I mean, and then let's talk about something real.
No, sorry.
Oh, I said, if you have any, let's switch over. But if you had any final comments on that segment.
No, I don't have anything final. I thought you summarized it pretty well there.
I'm a terrible interviewer because I can't shut up. When this morning, we actually talked this morning, your afternoon, and we were talking about stuff that you're interested in next week. You're going to be there. You've got workshops all day Monday, I guess. Is that it?
That's right. Yeah.
And there's still a little bit of space, but you do all this stuff, but you got a full week. And I asked you what you were interested in, and you were like, and you got super excited. So I'm gonna, and I actually did not know much about this and this K3S stuff. So tell me a little bit about it. Yeah. Go.
So there's three things that I'm super excited about at the moment. One of them, real quick, that I'll mention first is that yes, I write books and I make videos and stuff like that, and I love doing it. And I love connecting with people, and they would always come back to me at the end and say, look, Nigel, I loved your book or your videos and stuff. Now what do I do to take my journey to the next level? And it was always, get your hands dirty, right? Get your hands on and just play as much as you can. So something I'm really excited about at the moment, from my perspective, I'm helping build an online Kubernetes training platform where you get your own private cluster. We've got curated lessons. You can build and play and trash till your heart's content, called Magic Sandbox or MSB.com. That's super simple, right? The things I'm looking forward to at KubeCon next week are the things that I'm fortunate, right? Because they're super cool, but they're also the things that everybody seems to be talking about right now. And one of them is service mesh, and the other one is K3S or keys. So I'll talk about K3S first, just because I've mentioned learning, right? So I think we kind of get it that Kubernetes can be a little bit hard sometimes to set up and to get your head around and what have you. And when I was telling people in the past, like, get your hands on, my recommendation was always Minikube or Docker Desktop. Both of them relatively easy to get on your laptop. I think Docker Desktop, for me personally, was a little bit slicker, because I could download like an MSI file or something and next, and I'd have like Docker and a Kubernetes cluster. But a drawback to both of them was that you got one node. And so that one node was your Kubernetes master, and it was your Kubernetes worker node. And it was cool because it was on your laptop. But if you wanted to test proper scheduling and rolling updates and failovers of your applications between worker nodes and stuff like that, you couldn't do it. So along comes a project called K3S from the guys at Rancher Labs. And the idea for K3S at first was to have this really slimmed down, small, certified Kubernetes distribution that was originally designed for like edge devices and IoT stuff. And it does, it does work great for that. I think like in total, the distribution is 40 meg, and you can run it on machines with like less than half a gig of RAM. It really lightweight and super easy to spin up. But when you spin it up, what you get is like a full Kubernetes API, or API buzzword, right? So you get a full Kubernetes experience, but with multiple worker nodes, and you can have it on your laptop, right? So you can have like effectively what looks very much like a real production Kubernetes cluster or environment on your laptop that you can build, trash, deploy applications to, the whole shebang. The only thing that it doesn't have at the moment, and it's being worked on, is high availability of the control plane. But aside from that, K3S, if you're wanting a solution on your laptop for your local Kubernetes environment for you to test and play around with, honestly, it could hardly be easier. And I see it potentially as being one of these projects that started out as being like, yeah, we're doing something really lightweight and we're making it as simple as possible for the edge and for IoT. And the community is going to say, like that, let me use it for just about everything else going forward. Now, look, I don't speak in behalf of Rancher Labs or anybody with regards to K3S. And I could be totally wrong about this, but I really see the momentum that it has at the moment and the potential that this could become like that super easy way for you to get Kubernetes cluster on your laptop, fully working, great experience.
And there've been other, like you say, there've been other versions of this, I want to say attempts. There've been other projects that do this sort of thing. It seems like this one has the slice that's the right kind of the right slice for your needs right now.
Yeah. So I mean, it has some great people behind it. Not that other projects don't. And they've done a really good job with it. It's fully certified, CNCF certified distribution of Kubernetes, but it's super small and super lightweight, and just it's a dream if you're wanting to really start playing with Kubernetes properly, more something that looks and feels like production on your laptop, if you will.
But now obviously they had to cut some stuff out to get there. That's
so
or make some choice, or is it just an opinionated distribution?
Okay, maybe it's a little bit opinionated. Not super so though. I would say from cutting stuff out. I know originally they were, because without getting too technical, but Kubernetes has if you take the workloads API, so that where you have your deployments and things that are in there, Kubernetes capital D deployments, there was I'm going to say 6 or 7 versions of the deployment API would ship with every Kubernetes distribution.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
But backwards compatibility and all that kind of jazz. And I know, and I don't know if this has changed now, but I know certainly early on they were saying, we don't need to necessarily bring all of that baggage with us. And we might not need all of the plug-in drivers and things for everything in there.
Yeah, like Linux, right? You have all those drivers. You have there's distros that have everything. That if you're going to support that distribution, you're supporting everything. And like Suresh was just talking about, that there's a lot of ways to hook this stuff up. Versus, there have been trimmed down Linux distributions forever, and there are very specialty cloud ones too. I get it. But that's cool to me that it seems it could be used in production, but yet it's actually easy enough to use as my little first child's Kubernetes.
Yeah, and I think when they have high availability of the control plane, we probably will see people using it in production. Maybe not huge clusters. But again, it ships by default with SQLite rather than etcd as the backend data store. So you're not going to be wanting it to be a huge, busy, with a high amount of churn cluster. And
I can see there might be tooling there might be tooling that does or doesn't work with it because it expects certain things. That's really cool though. And so so you're going to be it sounds like that's an active topic, something you're both excited about for people next step after your material, but also there'll be some conversation around it next week at KubeCon.
Yeah, I just think a lot of the people that I follow and that I interact with on Twitter talking about it a lot, and people that I like and trust. Yeah,
that's a good sign. It's almost magic that we have that antenna. That's the reason we need to keep Twitter around, even if it sucks. That the people who put the time in and have the right network and have that sort of antenna, early warning. Hey, a question from the chat talking about MSB and the CNCF certs like CKA and things like that. How do you map to them? How are you looking at them in terms of your curriculum?
Yeah.
Content.
Okay, so we're a startup. We're a decently funded startup, actually. If you go to msb.com, and just provide your email address. We do have some free content on there so you can get a feel for what the experience is like. And I think anybody that's wanting to learn Kubernetes, because we have this live dashboard that joins everything together for you. So I write a bunch of lessons, and then as you deploy stuff, you see it build and scale, and you see everything happening. So it's super cool from like a connecting the dots in your head. We have CKAD is a high priority on the roadmap. CKA will come after that, just because CKA is, we can implement it, but it's a little bit more difficult because it has, some more hands-on, like how you build your cluster and tinker with the actual cluster side of things. And the way we present a Kubernetes cluster to you at the moment is you log in and instantly you've got your own 3-node cluster. So we're building in the future the ability for you to be able to tweak that and build stuff yourself, because that's an important part of CKA. CKAD, I believe we will have all of the content for that by the end of Q1 next year. Because we're adding new content all of the time. It's a content race for us now, really. And I feel personally that while I'm not a super huge fan of certifications in general, I know that they are highly valued increasingly by organizations. And I will say, I think that the Kubernetes certification, CKA and CKAD, the way that you tested on them, it makes them more valuable than some of the old, like, multiple choice, like my old MCSE on Windows NT4. That there were techniques to being able to guess the right checkbox, which was the right answer. Yeah. But we will also, just real quick, John, we'll be building in, it's almost pretty much complete anyway, a test exam simulator where we take the cluster that we give you, we break it and we say, here's a scenario, go and fix it. And we can test whether you fixed it properly and stuff. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
That's cool. It seems like you're having fun, right? Yeah. Right.
It's awesome. Honestly, there's so much cool stuff going on. I sound like a shill sometimes, but like I'm one of these people. I would like to actually kind of live in the future so that I could, explore space time and all that kind of jazz. But we don't half live in a decent time at the moment. I know there's difficulties globally and stuff like that. I'm not ignorant to that. But I think in the technology world, we live in a great age.
I know it's getting late there. You have a minute or two more here?
Absolutely. Yeah.
There was a question from someone in the ecosystem in chat asking, are you interested in having ecosystem partners participate and develop content? And I mean, that's even there's a whole business there, right?
By all means, reach out to me. We want to, so I think going forward, we want people and organizations to be able to leverage the platform to put their own content on there.
You're kind of building it could turn into a whole training platform, which is a kind of a dual-edged sword, right? It's both useful but hard. There's been a lot of generations of those.
Yeah, I know. But you know what? It's super, from my perspective, it complements and augments like books and videos.
Yeah.
It's just, it rounds out that whole sort of experience.
So last question. I got into this conversation on Twitter yesterday or the day before, and we were talking about blogs and about, the treadmill and always having to, this is a whole separate conversation about, how blogs are by design are never done. Right. And so you always have, your blog is always a little out of date, but you live in a world with content, rapidly changing subject matter. You're having, these certs or whatever, the Kubernetes distributions releases every quarter. But you've actually, as a content producer, what I think is kind of fascinating is you have your main Kubernetes book. You actually have an update schedule for that. You keep updating it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my book, the Kubernetes book, because Kubernetes is iterating so fast. Well, look, let me just start this out by saying that writing books is really hard, actually.
And when I said you're having fun, you're doing more than just like God, another rev of my book. I've got to go sit in the basement for a year. You're doing like you said, you're on site at KubeCon. You're doing this MSB. You're having. Yeah. That seems like fun. But anyway, sorry, keep going.
So it is hard work writing a book, and I would love to write a book on Kubernetes and to have it on Amazon and for it to be useful for 5 years and I don't have to touch it. I would be happiest guy going, right? But that just isn't the world that we live in these days. So I released the book originally, I think, in the summer of 2017, and it has had 6 versions since then. So 5 updates. I've done an update every 6 months at least. Next year, because I have my brother on board with my company now, and he's taken on a lot of the operational stuff for me, we're expecting to have an update to the book at least once a quarter. So if you have like the Kindle version or an ebook version from LeanPub, you get all of the updates for free. But if you're coming new and you're buying the paperback version, I can't update old paperback versions, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But if you are buying it, you know that you're getting something that is bang up to date. And I test all of the examples as well on Magic Sandbox on msb.com. And right now, I've tested all the examples on 1.16.2 version of Kubernetes. And if I look at the major cloud platforms, the major hosted Kubernetes platforms on like GKE and stuff like that, they're still on around 1.14 something. So you know that everything that's in the book is like super up to date. And I feel like, look, there are books out there that cover more Kubernetes subject matter than mine does, but a differentiator for my book is that it is, you're not getting something that's 2 or 3 years old. It is like bang up to date. It's
interesting, and probably easier than starting a brand new book and with a blank sheet of paper too.
Yeah,
I think that's really
totally.
An interesting modern dilemma and solution, which is to keep your book up to date.
I imagine it's going to be more popular going forward. Like, I know if you write a book on like a programming language or something, generally speaking, that can live for a long time. But infrastructure and cloud and stuff like that it's iterating so rapidly these days.
Yeah. Well, and LeanPub and things like that, have been, thrift stores are full of, useless books. LeanPub and things like that. I mean, I think it's a time for that. Hey, man, we should probably let you go, and, you have family and it's late, and also people have to get back to work, et cetera. So thank you so much for coming on. Blew my mind, learned a bunch of stuff. I'll see you. Hopefully we'll be running in the hallway past each other next week at KubeCon. Thanks a lot, Nigel. Really appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming in to this event. I'll put up a little slide here. You can catch Nigel at msb.com, nigelpoulton.com, Nigel Poulton on the Twitters. Thank you. We will email the recording to everybody. Thanks, everybody. This has been great. This has been Tech Reckoning Fest 5. Hey, Amy, let me stop. I'll stop sharing, so you'll be on the video. So everybody wave. Hey, cheers. Bye-bye. From the Caribbean, from Manchester, England, and from Half Moon Bay, California. So see you next time. Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers. I cancel this and stop this, and thanks everybody. Hey, thanks everybody who's still here. Thanks so much.